You'll be sleeping in the garage, my sister-in-law announced with a smirk, handing me a threadbare blanket. We're full up in the house. 6 hours later, as I watched her family's expressions transform from mockery to mortification while the banker explained exactly who had been making their mortgage payments for the past 2 years, I couldn't help but think this was the best Christmas gift I could have given myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Henderson family Christmas had always been a grand affair, at least according to my husband, Daniel. For the 5 years we'd been married, he'd painted idyllic pictures of his childhood home in Vermont. A sprawling colonial farmhouse with a massive stone fireplace where stockings hung in perfect formation, the scent of cinnamon and pine mingling in the air, and familial warmth that rivaled the heat from the crackling logs. This year would be our first Christmas with his family, as we'd always spent the holidays traveling for my work before. You'll love them, Daniel had promised as we drove the winding country roads, snow beginning to dust the landscape. My sister, Rebecca, is the most amazing hostess, and her husband Tyler renovated the entire place. It's like something out of a magazine now. I nodded, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I'd met Rebecca exactly once at our wedding, where she'd spent the entire reception commenting on how simple everything was and how surprised she was that someone with my background had managed to catch her brother's eye. Daniel had dismissed her behavior as wedding stress, insisting she was normally much warmer. As our car crunched up the gravel driveway, I took in the house that had featured in so many of Daniel's stories. It was indeed beautiful, a white colonial, with black shutters, wreaths on every window, and warm light spilling onto the snow. But something about it felt off. Perhaps the way the paint seemed too fresh, the decorations too perfect, as though the entire property was straining to maintain, an appearance it couldn't quite afford. Rebecca appeared on the porch before we'd even turned off the engine, her smile tight as she waved. At 38, she was 5 years older than Daniel and carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who considered herself perpetually observed and judged. Her highlighted blonde hair was swept into an immaculate updo, and despite the casual setting, she wore a cashmere sweater and pearls. "Danny," she called, using the childhood nickname I knew Daniel secretly hated. "You're finally here! We thought you'd never make it." She embraced him warmly before turning a considerably cooler gaze on me. "And Eliza, how interesting to see you again." I extended my hand, which she briefly touched as though concerned she might catch something. "Thank you for having us, Rebecca. Your home is lovely." "It's nothing special," she replied with practiced modesty that couldn't quite mask her pride. "Just a little piece of heaven we've carved out for ourselves." She linked her arm through Daniel's, already steering him toward the house. "Everyone's dying to see you. Mom's been baking all day, and the kids have been asking about Uncle Danny since breakfast." I followed a few steps behind, noting how easily I'd been excluded from the conversation. This wasn't entirely unexpected. In the years I'd been married to Daniel, his family had remained distant figures, people who sent impersonal Christmas cards and made occasional phone calls that never seemed to include me. Daniel chalked it up to geographic distance and busy schedules, but I'd long suspected it was something more. The interior of the house matched its exterior, expensively decorated with that particular brand of rustic luxury that required significant resources to achieve. A massive Christmas tree dominated the living room, surrounded by an almost obscene pile of wrapped presents. Family photos covered the walls, and I couldn't help but notice that the wedding photo Rebecca had displayed showed only Daniel, with me neatly cropped out of the frame. Rebecca's husband, Tyler, emerged from what appeared to be a home office, closing the door quickly behind him. He was a tall man with the physique of someone who paid dearly for a personal trainer, but rarely had time to see them. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "The prodigal brother returns," he announced, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. Good to see you, man. He turned to me with a slight nod. Eliza, welcome to our home. Thank you for having us, I repeated, wondering if anyone else noticed the tension beneath the veneer of holiday cheer. 2 children thundered down the stairs, Madison and Parker, aged 10 and 8. They launched themselves at Daniel with excited shrieks, while regarding me with the frank curiosity of children encountering an unfamiliar species. Are you really Aunt Eliza? Madison asked, her head tilted skeptically. Mom says you're really important and busy. Before I could answer, Rebecca laughed, a brittle sound. Madison! What a thing to say. I'm sure Aunt Eliza isn't as busy as all that. The emphasis she placed on important made it clear what she actually thought. Daniel's parents appeared next, Margaret and William Henderson. Margaret embraced her son with genuine warmth, while William offered a stiff pat on the back. Their greetings to me were polite but reserved, as though they weren't quite sure what to make of me even after 5 years. You must be exhausted from your drive, Margaret said, though we'd only come from Boston, barely 4 hours away. Rebecca has everything arranged for your stay. About that, Rebecca interjected, casting a glance at her husband. We've had a slight change of plans with the sleeping arrangements. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? I thought we'd be in the guest room. Rebecca's laugh tinkled like ice in a glass. Well, that was the original plan, but then Aunt Judith decided to join us at the last minute, and you know how her back is. She simply needs a proper bed. She sighed dramatically. We thought Daniel could bunk with Parker in his room, and Eliza. She paused, her smile not reaching her eyes. We've fixed up a nice little space in the garage. It's heated, of course. The room fell silent. I stared at Rebecca, waiting for the punchline to what surely must be a joke. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Bex, that's ridiculous. Eliza and I will stay together. We can take the sofa bed in the den, or something. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. The den is where Dad watches his programs, you know that. And we've already promised the kids they could have a sleepover in the living room by the tree. She turned to me with a smile that was pure venom disguised as honey. The garage is quite comfortable, really. Tyler set up a cot and a space heater. It's cozy. I glanced at Daniel, expecting him to protest further, to insist that if I was sleeping in the garage, he would too. Instead, he looked torn, unwilling to challenge his sister in her own home, but clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement. It's fine, I said quietly, though it was anything but. I'm sure it will be adequate. Wonderful, Rebecca clapped, her hands together. It's settled then. Now, who's ready for some hot cocoa? I've made it with real Belgian chocolate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the family moved toward the kitchen, I caught Tyler checking his phone, his expression momentarily worried before he tucked it away. The concern etched between his brows seemed at odds with the picture of prosperity they were so carefully maintaining. Later that afternoon, as everyone settled into Christmas Eve activities, the children decorating cookies, Margaret and Rebecca preparing dinner, William and Tyler watching football, Daniel pulled me aside in the hallway. I'm sorry about the sleeping arrangement, he whispered, glancing toward the kitchen to ensure we weren't overheard. Rebecca has always been a bit particular about her house. Particular? I echoed, keeping my voice low. Daniel, she's putting me in the garage while her aunt gets the guest room and you get to sleep in the house with everyone else. Don't you find that a little strange? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as discomfort. It's just for a couple of nights. And Aunt Judith really does have back problems. That's not the point, I said, frustration building. The point is that your sister is deliberately making me feel unwelcome, and you're letting her. She's not. he began, then stopped at my expression. Look, I know Rebecca can be difficult, but this is important to me. Having everyone together for Christmas, being back home, can't you just go along with it? For me? In that moment, I saw something in my husband I'd never fully acknowledged before, a desperate need to please the family that had always held him slightly at arm's length, the youngest child perpetually seeking approval. It was sad, really, and despite my anger, I felt a pang of sympathy. Fine, I conceded, but this conversation isn't over. Daniel's relief was palpable. Thank you, I promise I'll make it up to you. He kissed my cheek quickly before rejoining, his father and brother-in-law in the living room. I wandered into the kitchen, offering to help with dinner preparations. Rebecca assigned me the task of peeling potatoes, positioning me at the far end of the counter while she and Margaret worked on more visible, impressive dishes. As I worked, I caught snippets of their conversation, deliberately lowered whenever I moved closer. Can't believe he's still with her. What does he see in? Not like she's even pretty. I kept my head down, focusing on the potatoes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me affected. In truth, nothing they could say would hurt me more than Daniel's failure to stand up for me. As evening approached, Rebecca announced it was time for their tradition of opening one gift on Christmas Eve. The family gathered around the tree, and I sat slightly apart, watching the performance of Perfect Family Holiday with increasing detachment. This one's for you, Daniel, Rebecca said, handing him an expensively wrapped package. From all of us. He opened it to reveal a vintage watch. A Hamilton, I noted, probably worth several $1,000s. Daniel's eyes widened. This is... Wow, I don't know what to say. It was Grandpa's, Margaret explained, tears in her eyes. We thought it was time it came to you. The moment was genuinely touching, and I smiled, happy for my husband despite everything else. Then Rebecca turned to me, holding out a small, hastily wrapped package. And this is for you, Eliza, just a little something. Inside was a generic scarf, still with the discount store price tag partially removed. $12.99 was still visible in the corner. Thank you, I said evenly, meeting her gaze. It's very... thoughtful. Rebecca smiled, mission accomplished. Well, it's getting late. Eliza, let me show you where you'll be sleeping while everyone gets ready for bed. She led me through the mudroom to the attached garage, where indeed a camping cot had been set up in the corner. A small space heater hummed nearby, barely cutting the chill. A threadbare blanket and a flat pillow completed the uninviting picture. Bathrooms back through the house, but try to be quiet if you need it during the night. Madison is a very light sleeper. Rebecca handed me the blanket with that same venomous smile. Sleep tight. As the door closed behind her, I stood in the cold garage, surrounded by storage boxes and garden equipment, and felt something inside me finally snap. 5 years I'd spent trying to win over Daniel's family, 5 years of making excuses for their behavior, 5 years of watching my husband transform from the confident, kind man I'd married into an insecure people-pleaser whenever they were involved. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Jim, it's Eliza. Yes, Merry Christmas to you too. Listen, I need a favor for tomorrow morning. Yes, I know it's Christmas Day. When I returned to the house, the family was gathered in the living room, drinking eggnog and watching a holiday movie. Daniel looked up with a guilty expression but didn't move from his comfortable position on the couch. Everything okay out there? He asked quietly when I sat on the floor near him, there being no more space on the furniture. Everything's fine, I replied with a smile that puzzled him. Just perfect. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned bright and cold. I'd spent an uncomfortable night on the cot, the space heater having shut off sometime around 2 a.m. When I entered the house, everyone was already in the kitchen, the children excitedly waiting to open presents while the adults sipped coffee. "Merry Christmas," I said cheerfully, helping myself to coffee while ignoring the surprised looks at my upbeat demeanor. "Did you sleep well?" Margaret asked with forced politeness. "Like a log," I lied. Nothing like fresh air for a good night's sleep. We moved to the living room for the main event, the opening of presents. The children tore through their gifts with typical excitement while the adults exchanged increasingly expensive items. Daniel had bought his sister a designer handbag that I knew had stretched our budget, while she gave him a bottle of scotch that, while nice, had clearly cost a fraction in return. My gifts to the family, carefully chosen books for the children, artisanal Vermont maple products for the adults, were received with tepid thanks. Daniel, at least, had given me a lovely pair of earrings, though he'd presented them to me privately before we'd left our apartment, as though anticipating the imbalance that would be on display today. As the gift unwrapping concluded, and Rebecca began collecting discarded wrapping paper, the doorbell rang. Who could that be on Christmas morning? Margaret wondered. Tyler frowned. Probably just a package delivery. Rebecca smoothed her already perfect hair before answering the door. From my position, I could see her expression change from hostess ready to confusion. "Can I help you?" I heard her ask. A man's voice responded. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. I'm Jim Harrington from First National Bank. I'm looking for Eliza Chen." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I stood, straightening the same clothes I'd worn yesterday since my suitcase remained in the car. "Jim, thank you for coming," I said, walking to the door. "Please come in." Rebecca stepped back automatically, her confusion deepening as the middle-aged banker entered her perfectly decorated living room. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, standing as well. "Eliza, why is our banker here on Christmas Day?" Jim smiled, apologetically at the room. "I'm sorry for the intrusion on the holiday. Eliza called me yesterday evening with some concerns about the Collins family mortgage that needed immediate attention." Tyler's face drained of color. "Our mortgage? What the hell does she have to do with our mortgage?" I turned to face the family, feeling strangely calm. "That's a good question, Tyler. One I've been wondering myself for about 2 years now." Rebecca's perfect composure began to crack. "I don't understand what's happening." "Allow me to explain," Jim said, opening his briefcase. "For the past 24 months, the mortgage payments on this property have been made by a third party, specifically by a trust controlled by Ms. Chen." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the children sensed something significant was happening and stopped playing with their new toys. Daniel stared at me. "Eliza? What is he talking about?" I met his gaze steadily. "Remember 2 years ago when Rebecca called in a panic because they were 3 months behind on their mortgage and facing foreclosure? Remember how you asked if we could help them, and I said I'd see what I could do?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You said you'd talk to the bank and work something out. I thought you'd just negotiated a payment plan for them." "What I actually did," I continued, "was set up an automatic payment from my trust fund to cover their mortgage. Every month. For 2 years. Rebecca made a choking sound. "That's not possible. Tyler handles all our finances. We've been making our mortgage payments." Tyler's continued silence and ashen face told a different story. Jim cleared his throat. "According to our records, Mr. Collins stopped making payments in November 2 years ago. Ms. Chen's trust has been covering the $4,150 monthly payment since December of that year. That's a total of $102,000 to date." Margaret gasped. Williams, hand tightened around his coffee mug. Daniel looked stunned. "Why wouldn't you tell me this?" he asked quietly. "I tried," I replied. "You didn't want to hear it. You said it was better for everyone if your family thought they'd worked it out themselves, that it would be embarrassing for Rebecca and Tyler to know we were helping them." Rebecca turned on her husband. "Is this true? Have we not been paying our mortgage?" Tyler's composure finally broke. I was handling it. I had investments that were going to pay off. The business was having a temporary setback. A 2-year setback, I interjected. During which time you've purchased a new SUV, renovated your kitchen, and taken 3 family vacations to Europe. The perfect veneer of the Henderson Collins Christmas was cracking wide open now. Margaret was quietly crying. William looked furious. The children had been wisely removed to the kitchen by Daniel, who returned with an expression I couldn't quite read. Rebecca turned to me, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide her shock. "Why would you do this? You barely know us." "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" I replied. "Despite being married to Daniel for 5 years, I remain a stranger to this family. You've excluded me, belittled me, and now relegated me to sleeping in your garage while living in a house I've been paying for." Jim shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Chen has instructed me to provide options moving forward. She can continue the current arrangement, transfer the mortgage entirely to her name, or cease payments immediately, in which case the missed payments from Mr. Collins would become due." Rebecca's legs seemed to give out as she sank onto the couch. "You're saying she owns our house?" "Not technically," Jim clarified. "But she has been maintaining the financial obligation that prevents foreclosure." I held up a hand. "I didn't come here to take your house, Rebecca. I came here to spend Christmas with my husband's family, to finally be included in the traditions Daniel speaks about so fondly. Instead, I was deemed unworthy of even sleeping under the same roof." The room fell silent again as the full weight of the situation settled over everyone. Tyler had moved to sit beside Rebecca, their perfect image now in tatters. Margaret was whispering urgently to William. And Daniel, my husband, who had always tried to please everyone, stood in the middle, visibly torn. "What do you want?" Rebecca finally asked, her voice barely audible. It was the question I'd been waiting for, the opportunity to explain what had driven me to this dramatic revelation on Christmas morning. "I want what I've always wanted," I said simply. "Respect, not because of my family name or my trust fund, or what I can provide financially. Just basic human respect as Daniel's wife and a member of this family." Rebecca looked down at her perfectly manicured hands, now clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "And the mortgage?" "We'll continue the current arrangement until Tyler's business situation improves," I said, "or until you decide to sell and find something more within your means. That's between you and your bank. I didn't come here to humiliate you, despite how you've treated me." Daniel finally approached me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Why didn't you insist I know about this? 2 years, Eliza. That's a significant financial commitment you made without really consulting me. Would you have let me help them if I'd been transparent about the amount?" I asked. "Or would you have worried about pride and appearances, just like you did last night when you let your sister put me in the garage rather than making waves?" His lack of immediate response was answer enough. Jim closed his briefcase. "I'll leave these documents with you to review. Ms. Chen, is there anything else you needed from me today?" I shook my head. "No, thank you for coming, Jim. I appreciate you making time on the holiday." As he left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The picture-perfect Christmas morning had been shattered, replaced by a raw, honest moment that the Henderson family clearly had little experience navigating. William was the first to speak. "Perhaps we should reconsider the sleeping arrangements," he said gruffly. "It seems inappropriate for Eliza to continue using the garage." Rebecca nodded numbly. "Of course. I'll move Aunt Judith to Madison's room. You and Daniel can have the guest room." The concession, forced as it was, marked the beginning of what would be a long and complicated shift in family dynamics. As I looked around at their shocked faces, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a weary sort of relief that the pretense had finally been stripped away. Daniel moved closer, taking my hand. We need to talk, he whispered. Really talk. About all of this. I squeezed his hand, recognizing both the apology and the request in his words. Yes, we do. What no one in the room yet realized was that this uncomfortable Christmas revelation wasn't just about a mortgage or sleeping arrangements. It was about truth, about the stories we tell ourselves and others, about the facades we maintain, and what happens when they inevitably crack. For the Henderson family, the perfect Christmas had been disrupted, but perhaps what would emerge from the ruins would be something more authentic, more genuine than they'd experienced in years. And for me, standing in the middle of this family crisis I'd reluctantly engineered, there was the small, quiet acknowledgement that sometimes respect cannot be passively earned. Sometimes it must be forcefully claimed. The aftermath of Jim's departure left the house in a state of suspended animation. Rebecca had retreated to the kitchen, the rhythmic sound of her aggressive dishwashing punctuating the uncomfortable silence. Tyler had vanished into his office, door firmly shut. Margaret and William sat in the living room, speaking in hushed tones that ceased whenever anyone walked past. The children, sensing the strange tension, had taken their new toys to the basement playroom, unusually subdued for Christmas morning. Daniel and I stood in the guest room, now officially ours, as I finally unpacked my suitcase from the car. The room was immaculate, with coordinating bedding and curtains, fresh flowers on the nightstand, and even chocolates on the pillow. It was clear that someone had gone to considerable effort to make it welcoming for Aunt Judith. I still can't believe you've been paying their mortgage, Daniel said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. For 2 years. I carefully hung my dress for Christmas dinner in the closet. I can't believe you're more concerned about that than the fact that your sister put me in the garage while living in a house I've been financing. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen more in the past 24 hours than in months prior. It's not that simple, Eliza. It seems pretty simple to me, I replied, keeping my voice even. Your family has never accepted me. They've treated me like an intruder from day one. And when they needed help, I gave it, anonymously, as you requested, only to be treated even worse. They didn't know about the mortgage. That's not the point, and you know it. I turned to face him fully. The point is that they've never respected me, and you've never required them to. Every slight, every exclusion, every passive-aggressive comment, you've explained it away or asked me to ignore it for the sake of family harmony. Daniel's expression was pained. They're my family, Eliza. And what am I? The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been after 5 years of marriage. Before he could answer, a soft knock interrupted us. Margaret stood in the doorway, looking older than she had just hours before. May I come in? She asked, her usual confidence diminished. When neither of us objected, she entered, closing the door behind her. I think we need to talk. I gestured to the small sitting area by the window, and we all took seats. Daniel and I on the love seat, Margaret in the armchair facing us. First, she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, I want to apologize for the sleeping arrangements. It was inappropriate and unkind. I nodded but said nothing, waiting. I also want to say that I had no idea about the mortgage situation. William and I thought Tyler's business was doing well. We had no reason to suspect. She trailed off, then gathered herself. But that doesn't excuse how you've been treated, Eliza. Not just last night, but since you and Daniel married. The acknowledgement, as minimal as it was, still caught me by surprise. Why? I asked simply. What did I ever do to make you all dislike me so much? Margaret looked genuinely taken aback. Dislike you? We don't dislike you. Then what would you call it? She stared out the window for a moment, collecting her thoughts. I suppose. Intimidation, perhaps. Discomfort. Intimidation? I echoed, genuinely confused. What could possibly be intimidating about me? Margaret gave a small, sad smile. Everything, my dear. Your background, your education, your career, your family name. You come from a world very different from ours. I glanced at Daniel, who looked equally confused. But you've always presented yourselves as successful. This house, the vacations, the way you talk about the family business. Appearances, Margaret said quietly. We Hendersons are very good at appearances. William's construction company has always been small but respectable. We lived comfortably, not extravagantly. We remortgaged our own home to help Rebecca and Tyler with the down payment on this house. Her eyes grew distant. They insisted they could afford it. We wanted to believe them. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not malice, but insecurity. Not rejection, but fear. When Daniel brought you home, this brilliant, beautiful woman from one of Boston's oldest families, with degrees from schools we could never afford to send our children to, we felt. She paused, searching for the right word. Inadequate. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, that's ridiculous. Eliza has never acted superior or looked down on anyone. I know, Margaret admitted. That almost made it worse. Your genuine kindness meant we couldn't even properly resent you. She turned to me. Instead, we kept our distance. It was easier than acknowledging the disparity. I processed this revelation slowly. All this time, I'd interpreted their coldness as disapproval or snobbery, never considering it might be the opposite, that they felt judged by my very existence, regardless of my behavior. And Rebecca? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Margaret sighed. Rebecca has always been concerned with status. Her friendship circles, her children's activities, this house. It's all part of the image she's constructed. When her financial reality didn't match that image, she couldn't face it. Learning that you've been secretly supporting that illusion. She shook her head. It's devastating to her pride. The room fell silent as we absorbed this new understanding. I thought about the past 5 years, all the missed opportunities for connection, the assumptions on both sides, the protective distance we'd all maintained for entirely different reasons. I never wanted to make anyone feel inadequate, I said finally. That was never my intention. Of course not, Margaret replied. The failure has been ours. We should have tried harder to know you, the real you, not the idea of you we created, in our minds. Daniel took my hand, squeezing it gently. Where do we go from here? He asked, directing the question to both of us. Before either of us could answer, another knock came at the door. This time it was William, his expression grave. Tyler would like to speak with everyone in the living room, he announced. He says it's important. We followed William downstairs to find Tyler standing by the fireplace, papers spread on the coffee table. Rebecca sat stiffly on the couch, eyes red-rimmed but dry. The children were nowhere to be seen. I've sent Madison and Parker to play at the neighbors, Tyler explained, answering my unspoken question. They don't need to hear this. We arranged ourselves around the living room, Daniel and I on the smaller sofa, Margaret and William in their usual chairs, Rebecca maintaining her distance on the main couch. The Christmas tree lights blinked cheerfully, an incongruous backdrop to the tension filling the room. Tyler cleared his throat. I owe everyone an explanation and an apology. He picked up what appeared to be financial statements. The truth is, Colin's development has been failing for nearly 3 years. We lost our major investor in 2020, and I've been trying to keep things afloat with increasingly desperate measures. Rebecca stared straight ahead, her posture rigid as Tyler continued. The mortgage payments stopped because I had to choose between that and paying our suppliers. I was planning to catch up when things turned around. Then, miraculously, the bank stopped sending notices. I assumed they'd approved some kind of forbearance program. He turned to face me directly, I never imagined someone was making the payments for us. Especially not you, Eliza. Why not me? I asked, genuinely curious. Tyler had the grace to look ashamed. Because we've never been kind to you, never welcomed you properly into the family. Why would you help us? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times over the past 2 years. Because despite everything, you're Daniel's family, and family helps family when they're in trouble. Rebecca made a small, choked sound, her first contribution to the conversation. There's more, Tyler continued, his voice strained. The business is beyond saving at this point. I've been hiding final notices, avoiding calls, pretending everything was fine while watching it all crumble. He ran a hand over his face. We're not just behind on the mortgage. We're drowning in debt. Business loans, credit cards, personal loans. All of it used to maintain this. He gestured around the impeccably decorated room. This illusion. The silence that followed was deafening. William eventually broke it. Why didn't you come to us? We would have helped however we could. Tyler's laugh was hollow. With what, William? Your own company barely survived the pandemic. And besides, his voice softened. We were supposed to be the success story, the ones who made it. How could we admit we were failing? I thought about the charade of prosperity this house represented. The renovations, the designer furniture, the expensive Christmas gifts, all maintained while financial disaster loomed. The pressure to appear successful had driven Tyler and Rebecca to risk everything rather than admit they needed help. What happens now? Daniel asked, directing his question to Tyler but glancing at me. Tyler straightened his shoulders. I've made an appointment with a bankruptcy attorney for next week. The business can't be saved. This house. He looked around with a mixture of love and resignation. We can't afford it. Even with Eliza's generous help. We need to downsize. Rebuild from a more honest foundation. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll lose everything. Not everything, I said, drawing everyone's attention. You'll lose things, yes. The house, maybe the cars, certainly some status in whatever social circles you've been trying to impress. But you won't lose everything. I stood and moved to sit beside her, ignoring her instinctive stiffening. You have your children, your family, your health, and you have an opportunity that many people never get, the chance to rebuild without the weight of pretense. Rebecca looked at me then, really looked at me perhaps for the first time since we'd met. Why are you being kind to me? After how I've treated you, after what I did last night, you should be gloating. Gloating would be easy, I admitted. But it wouldn't change anything. And despite what you might think of me, I don't enjoy seeing people suffer, especially not my husband's family. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Tyler moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. I've already spoken with a realtor, he said. There's a smaller house in Riverside that would be within our means if we can sell this one and clear enough of the debt. William leaned forward. Whatever help we can offer, it's yours. No judgment, no lectures. We're family, and we'll face this together. The words seemed to break something in Rebecca. Tears began to flow, and she covered her face with her hands. I'm so embarrassed, she whispered. So ashamed. Margaret moved to sit on her other side. We've all made mistakes, all chosen pride over honesty at some point. The question is what we do next. As the family began discussing practical matters, what assets could be liquidated, which debts should be prioritized, how to explain the changes to the children, I felt Daniel's hand on my shoulder. He tilted his head toward the door, indicating, we should step out. I followed him to the front porch, where the cold air was a welcome relief from the emotional intensity inside. You're remarkable, he said simply, leaning against the railing. Not many people would respond with compassion rather than satisfaction in this situation. I pulled my sweater tighter against the chill. Satisfaction is fleeting. This family needs healing, not more wounds. Daniel studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When did you get so wise? Around the same time I started secretly paying your sister's mortgage, I replied with a small smile. Nothing like anonymous financial support to give. You perspective on a family's dynamics. He laughed, then grew serious. I owe you an apology. Several, actually. You do, I agreed. I should have stood up for you last night. I should have insisted we stay together, or that we both take the garage, or better yet, that we find a hotel. I was so caught up in wanting everything to be perfect, in finally having the family Christmas I'd built up in my head, that I failed to protect the most important person in my life. The acknowledgement meant more than I expected it to. Yes, you should have, but I understand why you didn't. Family patterns are powerful things. Daniel took my hands, his expression earnest. That's no excuse. I've been doing it our entire relationship, allowing their behavior, making excuses, asking you to accommodate their coldness rather than demanding they treat you with respect. I was a coward. You were caught in the middle, I offered, not to excuse him but to acknowledge the complexity of his position. Trying to please everyone and ending up pleasing no one, least of all yourself. He nodded, the truth of it written across his face. When Jim showed up this morning and I realized what you'd done, not just the financial support but forcing everything into the open, I was initially angry. Then I realized something. What's that? You did what I should have done years ago. You refused to participate in the facade. You demanded truth, respect, and authentic connection, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant risking rejection. I leaned against him, taking comfort in his solid presence despite the morning's revelations. I didn't plan to do it this way. I called Jim on impulse last night, after being sent to the garage. It was a breaking point. A necessary one, Daniel said, for all of us. We stood in silence for a moment, watching our breath form clouds in the cold air. Inside, a family was confronting years of financial deception and social pretense. Out here, we were having our own reckoning, with the patterns that had defined our marriage and the changes needed to strengthen it. What happens after Christmas? I finally asked. When we go back to Boston and they stay here to deal with the fallout? Daniel considered this. I think we stay connected, truly connected, for the first time. No more surface-level interactions, no more polite distance. We help them through this transition, not just financially but emotionally. And they get to know the real you, not the intimidating figure they invented. And us? I gestured between us. What happens with us? He took my face in his hands, his eyes serious. We have our own reckoning to do. I need to be a better husband, a better partner. I need to stop trying to please everyone at your expense. And we need to be more honest with each other about everything. Money, family, expectations. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was a start. The foundations had been laid for something more authentic than what we'd had before, not just with his family but between us as well. The front door opened and Margaret peered out. The children are back, and they're asking about Christmas dinner. Should we try to continue with the day? Daniel looked at me, leaving the decision in my hands. I considered the alternatives. Abandoning the holiday entirely, retreating to a hotel, pushing forward with forced festivity. None seemed right. Let's reimagine the day, I suggested. Something simpler, more honest. These might be the last holidays in this house. Let's make memories that matter, not ones that look good in photographs. Margaret nodded, understanding immediately. I'll tell the others. As she disappeared back inside, Daniel squeezed my hand. Thank you, he said, simply. For what? For not giving up on us. Any of us. I thought about the long road ahead, Tyler and Rebecca's bankruptcy, the sale of their too-expensive house, the children's adjustment to a new financial reality, and the rebuilding of family relationships on a more authentic foundation. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks and resentments to navigate. But there was also possibility for genuine connection, for mutual respect, for the kind of family I had always hoped to join when I married Daniel. Christmas in the garage might have been the best gift I could have received, I said thoughtfully. Daniel looked confused. How so? It forced everything into the open. No more pretending, no more facades. It's painful, but it's real. He nodded slowly. From the ashes of a fake perfect Christmas might come the possibility of a genuine imperfect family, I finished. We returned inside to find the family gathered in the kitchen. The elaborate table setting had been abandoned, the formal dining room left dark. Instead, Rebecca was placing platters of food directly on the kitchen island. Ham, potatoes, vegetable dishes, rolls, in a casual buffet arrangement. The children were helping set out plates and silverware, laughing at some private joke. Tyler was opening wine, his movements more relaxed than they had been all day. William and Margaret were arranging chairs around the kitchen table and counters, creating an impromptu dining area. Gone was the strained formality of the previous night. In its place was something messier but more authentic, a family in crisis but facing it together. Madison spotted us first. Aunt Eliza, Uncle Danny, Mom says we're having Christmas picnic style this year. Isn't that cool? I smiled at her enthusiasm. Very cool. What can we do to help? Rebecca looked up from arranging a platter. Her eyes were still red, but her expression was different. Humbled, but determined. Could you help with the drinks? We thought we'd use the everyday glasses instead of the crystal. The implication wasn't lost on me. The everyday glasses. The casual meal. The abandonment of appearances in favor of practicality and genuineness. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. Happy to help, I replied, moving to the cabinet she indicated. As I arranged glasses on a tray, I felt a light touch on my arm. Rebecca stood beside me, her voice low so only I could hear. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she said. What I did last night was cruel and unnecessary. But I want you to know that I see it now. How my insecurity and pride have poisoned what could have been a meaningful relationship. I hope, in time, we might start again. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. And after years of superficial interactions, honesty felt like a gift. I'd like that, I said simply. She nodded once, then returned to her tasks. No dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, just a quiet acknowledgement and the potential for something better moving forward. As we gathered around the kitchen for our makeshift Christmas dinner, the conversation was stilted at first. No one quite knew how to proceed in this new landscape where the truth was exposed and pretenses abandoned. But gradually, as the meal progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Tyler spoke candidly about his business failures and what he'd learned from them. William shared stories of his own financial struggles when first starting his construction company. Margaret admitted to her envy of families that seemed to have it all together, confessing that she'd spent years trying to project an image of perfection while feeling inadequate. And Rebecca, in perhaps the most significant shift of all, asked me questions about my work, my background, my perspectives, not to measure herself against them, but out of genuine interest. For the first time, she seemed to see me as a person, rather than a threat or a stereotype. Daniel watched these exchanges with a mixture of amazement and relief, occasionally squeezing my hand under the table. This wasn't the picture-perfect Christmas he had described during our drive, but it was real in a way that mattered more. As the day progressed into evening, we abandoned the usual formal activities for simpler pleasures. The children taught me their favorite board game, William, and Daniel built a fire in the fireplace. Margaret and I discovered a shared interest in historical fiction and exchanged book recommendations. Tyler and Rebecca spoke quietly in the kitchen, making plans and adjustments, their expressions serious but united. When it came time for bed, Rebecca approached me with a hesitant smile. "The guest room is prepared for you and Daniel," she said. "Fresh towels in the bathroom, extra blankets in the closet. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to ask." The irony of her solicitude after the previous night's garage arrangement wasn't lost on either of us, but I chose not to dwell on it. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sure it will be perfect." As Daniel and I settled into the comfortable guest room that night, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had changed in just 24 hours. From exile in the garage to welcomed family member. From resented outsider to reluctantly acknowledged savior. From polite distance to painful honesty. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "How strange life is," I replied. "Yesterday I was dreading this visit, counting the hours until we could leave. Now I'm invested in helping your family through this transition." He pulled me closer. "They're your family too. Maybe now they'll finally act like it." "It's not that simple," I cautioned. "Old patterns don't disappear overnight. There will be backsliding, resentment, difficult moments ahead. Real change takes time and consistent effort." "I know." He agreed. "But at least now we're dealing with reality instead of illusion. That's a foundation we can build on." As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the garage where I'd spent the previous night. Cold, uncomfortable, symbolic of my outsider status in this family. That humiliation had triggered a chain of events leading to painful but necessary truths. Sometimes, I reflected, the worst moments contain the seeds of transformation, if we're brave enough to nurture them. Christmas in the garage hadn't been the holiday I expected, but it had given this family something far more valuable than perfectly wrapped presents or elaborately staged traditions. It had given us a chance at authenticity, at genuine connection founded on truth rather than appearances. It had torn down the walls of pretense that had kept us all prisoners of illusion. And perhaps that was the most valuable gift of all, the opportunity to build something real from the rubble of what was false. Not perfect, not instant, but honest. A beginning rather than an ending. The morning after Christmas dawned with a clarity that seemed fitting for our new circumstances. Sunlight streamed through the guest room windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Tiny imperfections made beautiful by the light. I watched them for a moment before Daniel stirred beside me. "What time is it?" he mumbled, reaching for his phone. "Just after 8, I replied, making no move to get up. After the emotional intensity of yesterday, I was in no hurry to face whatever this day might bring. Daniel propped himself up on one elbow. "I think I smell coffee." The aroma was indeed drifting up from the kitchen, rich and inviting. Still, I hesitated. "Are you ready for day 2 of Henderson family reckoning?" He smiled wryly. "Is anyone ever ready for that?" We dressed and made our way downstairs to find the kitchen already active. William sat at the counter with a newspaper and coffee. Margaret was making pancakes, the normality of the scene almost jarring after yesterday's revelations. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen, but Tyler sat at the table with a laptop and stacks of papers, his expression focused. "Good morning," Margaret greeted us, her smile tentative but genuine. "Coffee's fresh. Pancakes will be ready in a few minutes." Daniel poured us each a cup while I took a seat across from Tyler. He glanced up briefly, acknowledging my presence with a nod before returning to his calculations. The dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Financial? Triage?" I asked quietly. He nodded without looking up. "Trying to get a complete picture before meeting with the bankruptcy attorney. It's worse than I thought." I sipped my coffee, considering my next words carefully. Would it be helpful to have another perspective? Tyler paused, his pen hovering over a column of figures. You want to help? After everything? I have some experience with financial restructuring, I said simply. It was an understatement. Before taking a step back to focus on nonprofit work, I'd been known for turning around struggling investment portfolios. Tyler seemed to wrestle with his pride for a moment before sliding some of the papers toward me. Our main issues are here and here, he indicated 2 sections. The business loans are the most pressing, but the credit card debt is at a higher interest rate. I scanned the documents quickly, getting a sense of their overall financials position. It was indeed dire. Nearly $300,000 in business debt, another $120,000 in personal credit cards, the mortgage underwater by about $50,000 given current market values. No wonder he looked exhausted. May I? I gestured to his laptop. Tyler hesitated, then turned it toward me. I opened a new spreadsheet and began entering figures, creating a prioritized debt management plan. Daniel brought over pancakes and sat beside me, watching as I worked. The business needs to be wound down in an orderly fashion, I explained as I typed. But there may be assets that can be salvaged to offset some of the debt. What's the inventory situation? Tyler blinked, perhaps surprised by my straightforward approach. We have about $80,000 in building materials and equipment, but the market value is probably lower. I nodded, adjusting figures. And the personal assets? Besides the house? 2 cars, both with loans, Rebecca's jewelry, some art we've collected. He ran a hand through his hair. Nothing that would make a significant dent. Margaret placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. Eat something, Tyler. You've been at this since 5 this morning. He obeyed mechanically, his eyes never leaving the financial documents. I continued working, creating a timeline for debt resolution and asset liquidation that would minimize the long-term damage to their credit while establishing a realistic path forward. The kitchen door swung open, and Rebecca entered carrying grocery bags. She faltered slightly upon seeing me at the table with Tyler's financial documents, but recovered quickly. Good morning, she said, setting the bags on the counter. I got more eggs and milk and some cereal for the kids. I noticed she'd dressed simply today, jeans and a sweater rather than the carefully coordinated outfit of yesterday. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her face free of makeup. The transformation was striking, not because she looked worse, but because she looked more authentic. Where are Madison and Parker? Daniel asked, helping unpack the groceries. Still sleeping, Rebecca replied. They were up late talking. They have questions about what's happening. She glanced at Tyler, concern evident in her expression. William folded his newspaper and addressed the question we'd all been avoiding. What are you going to tell them? About the house? The finances? Everything? Tyler and Rebecca exchanged looks. The truth, Tyler said finally. A simplified version. But the truth. That we made mistakes with money, spent more than we had, and now we need to make changes. They're going to be upset about moving, Rebecca added, her voice tight. They love this house, their school, their friends. Children are resilient, Margaret said gently. More so than we give them credit for. What damages them isn't change. It's dishonesty and tension. Rebecca nodded, blinking back tears. I know. I just keep thinking about all the things they're going to lose because of our mistakes. They won't lose what matters most, I said, looking up from the laptop. Family, security, love. Those don't depend on square footage or zip codes. Rebecca met my gaze, something like respect flickering in her expression. I hope you're right. She peered at the spreadsheet on the screen. What are you working on? A preliminary restructuring plan, Tyler explained. Eliza offered to help. Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded and turned to finish unpacking the groceries. I returned to the financial plan, adding notes about potential negotiation strategies with creditors and timelines for various actions. After about an hour of focused work, I slid the laptop back to Tyler. This is just a starting point, but it should give you a clearer picture of the path forward. I've prioritized the debts, identified assets that could be liquidated, and estimated a realistic timeline for recovery. Tyler stared at the screen, studying my work with increasing interest. This is comprehensive, and actually not as apocalyptic as I feared. It won't be easy, I cautioned. You're looking at significant lifestyle adjustments for at least 3 to 5 years. But it's manageable with discipline and the right strategies. 3 to 5 years, Rebecca repeated from across the room, where she'd been listening quietly. That's actually shorter than I expected. The sound of footsteps on the stairs signaled the children's awakening. Madison appeared first, her hair tousled from sleep, followed by Parker, who headed straight for the remaining pancakes. They eyed the adults warily, sensing the unusual atmosphere. "Good morning, sleepyheads," Rebecca greeted them with forced cheerfulness. "Pancakes are on the counter, orange juice in the fridge." As the children settled at the table, an uncomfortable silence fell. The contrast between their innocent normalcy and the adults' knowledge of the upheaval to come created an almost palpable tension. Madison, perceptive as ever, looked around at our faces. "Is something bad happening? You all look weird." Tyler and Rebecca exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Tyler closed the laptop and pushed aside the financial papers. "Actually, your mom and I want to talk to you both about some changes that are coming," he said carefully. "After breakfast, okay?" Parker, mouth full of pancake, seemed unconcerned, but Madison's eyes narrowed. "What kind of changes?" "Big ones," Rebecca admitted, "but nothing we can't handle together as a family." I stood, gathering my empty coffee cup. "Daniel and I should give you some privacy for this conversation." "No," Tyler said, surprising. "Me. If you're comfortable staying, I'd like you to. Both of you." He looked at Daniel. "We're going to need family support through this, and your family." The simple acknowledgement that Daniel and I were family, not distant relations to be kept at arm's length, felt significant. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, equally moved by the inclusion. "We'll stay," he confirmed. After the children finished eating, the family gathered in the living room. Daniel and I sat slightly apart, present but giving the core family unit space for this difficult discussion. Tyler and Rebecca sat on the sofa with Madison and Parker between them. "We need to talk about some grown-up problems," Tyler began, his voice gentle but serious. "Problems with money that mean we're going to have to make some changes in our lives." "What kind of changes?" Madison asked immediately. Tyler took a deep breath. "We're going to have to sell this house and move to a smaller one. I'm going to close my business and find a different job, and we'll need to be more careful about spending money for a while." Parker's eyes widened. "We're moving? But what about my treehouse and my friends?" "I know it's hard to understand," Rebecca said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "But sometimes adults make mistakes, and then we have to fix them. Dad and I spent more money than we had, and now we need to make things right." Madison, ever practical, began asking specific questions about the timeline, the new house, her school. Tyler and Rebecca answered as honestly as they could, sometimes deferring to, "We don't know yet," when necessary. Parker, initially upset, began to calm as the conversation continued, particularly when Rebecca assured him they would find a house with a yard where he could build a new treehouse. I watched this family dialogue with a mixture of admiration and something like awe. The honesty they were showing their children, the vulnerability, the willingness to admit mistakes, It was so far removed from the perfect facade they had maintained just days ago that it felt like watching an entirely different family. As the conversation wound down, Madison surprised everyone by turning to me. "Aunt Eliza, are you helping Mom and Dad fix the money problems?" All eyes turned to me, and I chose my words carefully. "I'm offering some advice, yes. Your parents are making the hard decisions and doing the real work." She nodded, processing this. "Dad said last night that you're really smart about money and business stuff. He said we should have listened to you a long time ago." I glanced at Tyler, surprised by this revelation. He met my gaze with a small, acknowledging nod. "Well," I said to Madison, "sometimes it takes a while for grown-ups to learn to listen to each other. We're not always as smart as kids think we are." This drew a small giggle from Parker, lightening the moment. Rebecca stood, signaling the end of the family meeting. "How about we all get dressed and then maybe take a walk?" she suggested. "It's a beautiful day, and I think some fresh air would do us good." As the children ran upstairs to change, the adults remained in the living room, a collective exhale seeming to pass through the group. "That went better than I expected," Tyler admitted. "Children can handle difficult truths," William said. "It's the lies and secrets that confuse them." Rebecca turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for staying, and for helping with the financial plan. I know we haven't given you much reason to want to help us." "That's what family does," I replied, echoing Tyler's earlier sentiment. "We help each other through difficult times." The walk through the snow-covered neighborhood that afternoon marked a turning point in my relationship with the Henderson family. Away from the house that had become a symbol of pretense and financial strain, conversations flowed more naturally. William told stories about Daniel's childhood escapades that I'd never heard before. Margaret asked genuine questions about my nonprofit work. The children insisted on showing me their favorite sledding hill, their excitement infectious. Rebecca walked beside me for a time, our steps falling into rhythm. "I keep thinking about all the wasted years," she said quietly. "How differently things might have gone if I hadn't been so insecure, so determined to keep up appearances." "We can't change the past," I replied, "but we can choose a different path going forward." She nodded, watching as Daniel helped Parker build a small snowman. "I think I'm ready for that different path, however difficult it might be." The constant pretending was exhausting. That evening, our last at the Henderson family home, we ordered pizza, a departure from the elaborate post-Christmas dinner Rebecca would normally have prepared. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on our laps, talking and laughing with a freedom that felt entirely new. The children convinced Daniel to play charades, and soon even William was participating, his usually stoic demeanor giving way to surprising theatrical talents. As I watched these interactions, I realized that what I was witnessing wasn't just a family in crisis, but a family in transformation. The financial collapse had forced them to abandon the artificial and embrace the authentic. The result, though painful, contained seeds of something healthier than what had existed before. Later, as Daniel and I packed our bags for the return to Boston the next morning, he paused, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I keep thinking about how differently this visit could have gone," he said. "If Rebecca hadn't put you in the garage, if you hadn't called Jim, if you had stood up for me," I added gently. He nodded, accepting the truth of it. "If I had stood up for you, we might have had another superficial holiday, maintaining the same distance, perpetuating the same patterns." He reached for my hand. "Instead, we've had this reckoning. Painful, but necessary." "What happens when we go back to our lives?" I asked. "How do we maintain this new honesty, this authenticity?" Daniel considered the question. "I think we stay involved. Not just financially, but emotionally. Weekly calls, regular visits, Real conversations. He squeezed my hand. And between us, no more tiptoeing around difficult topics, no more protecting me from family truths I don't want to hear. I'd like that, I said. All of it. A soft knock interrupted us. Rebecca stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I come in for a minute?" she asked. Daniel waved her in, and she perched on the small armchair by the window. "I wanted to speak with you both before you leave tomorrow," she began. "Particularly you, Eliza." She twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not just the acknowledgement I offered yesterday." I sat beside Daniel, giving her my full attention. "When you and Daniel married, I resented you immediately," she continued. "Your family name, your education, your confidence, they highlighted everything I was trying to pretend to be. Instead of seeing you as an ally, I saw you as a threat. Someone who might expose the gap between my carefully constructed image and reality." She took a deep breath. "Making you sleep in the garage was cruel and petty. It wasn't about space or Aunt Judith's back problems. It was about putting you in your place, maintaining the illusion that I had power in this relationship. And I'm deeply, truly sorry." The raw honesty of her apology caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished, superficial Rebecca of 2 days ago, but someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, buried beneath layers of insecurity and pretense. "I accept your apology," I said simply. "And I hope we can build something different going forward." "I'd like that," she replied, echoing my words to Daniel moments before. She turned to her brother. "And you, I owe you an apology too. I've been keeping you at a distance for years, allowing only the most superficial relationship because I was afraid you'd see through the facade. I've missed having a real relationship with my brother." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion when he responded, "I've missed that too, Bex. More than you know." The childhood nickname, spoken with genuine affection rather than obligation, seemed to touch Rebecca deeply. She wiped away a tear, composing herself. "Well," she said, standing, "I should let you finish packing, but I wanted you both to know, when you come back, things will be different. We'll be different." After she left, Daniel and I finished our packing in contemplative silence. The visit had unfolded in ways neither of us could have anticipated, revealing truths and possibilities that would take time to fully process. Our departure the next morning lacked the awkward formality that might have characterized it days before. The goodbye hugs were genuine, the promises to stay in touch sincere. Tyler pulled me aside briefly to thank me again for the financial guidance, mentioning that he'd scheduled appointments with both the bankruptcy attorney and a job counselor. Rebecca handed me a small package, a framed photo of Daniel and me from our wedding day, one I'd never seen before. "I found this while looking through some old albums last night," she explained. "It captures something real between you two. I thought you should have it." The gesture, small but meaningful, represented another step in our evolving relationship. As we drove away, I studied the photograph. Daniel and I caught in a moment of shared laughter, utterly absorbed in each other. It portrayed not the posed perfection of official wedding photos, but the authentic joy of a genuine connection. "Do you think they'll be okay?" I asked as the house disappeared from view. "Tyler and Rebecca, the kids, the whole situation?" Daniel considered this. "It won't be easy. There will be setbacks, difficult adjustments. But yes, I think they'll be okay. Better than okay. Eventually. There's something liberating about finally facing the truth, however painful." I thought about the transformations I'd witnessed over the past 48 hours, not just in Rebecca and Tyler, but in all of us. The pretenses abandoned, the vulnerabilities revealed, the beginnings of authentic connections emerging from the wreckage of carefully maintained illusions. I never expected to be grateful for being sent to sleep in a garage, I mused, watching the winter landscape pass by our windows. But in a strange way, I am. Daniel glanced at me, curiosity in his expression. Because it led to the truth coming out? That, yes. But also because it showed me something about myself, that I still had limits, boundaries I wouldn't allow to be crossed without consequence. After years of accommodating your family's distance, I finally reached the point where I demanded acknowledgement, if not respect. He nodded slowly. It showed me something too. How much I'd compromised to maintain an illusion of family harmony, and how that compromise was hurting not just you, but all of us. He reached for my hand. I won't make that mistake again. As we continued our journey home, I reflected on how quickly life can change, how a single decision, a moment of clarity, an act of courage can alter the course of multiple lives. Rebecca's petty cruelty in sending me to the garage had inadvertently triggered a chain of events that might ultimately save her family from both financial and emotional bankruptcy. My phone chimed with a text message from Margaret. Thank you for your patience with us. This visit brought painful truths, but also hope. You are always welcome in our family. I showed the message to Daniel, who smiled. From the garage to always welcome. And that's quite a journey for one Christmas visit. The journey's just beginning, I reminded him. Real change takes time and consistent effort, remember? I remember, he assured me. And I'm committed to doing that work, both with my family and with us. 3 months later, we returned to Vermont to help Tyler and Rebecca move into their new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a friendly neighborhood, about half the size of their previous residence but warm and welcoming in its simplicity. The children had adjusted better than expected, finding new friends and activities while maintaining connections to old ones. Tyler had secured a position with a construction management firm, leveraging his industry knowledge in a role with regular hours and steady income. Rebecca had taken a part-time job at a local gallery, discovering a genuine passion for art that had previously been overshadowed by social climbing. As we helped unpack boxes and arrange furniture, I noticed the absence of certain items that had been prominent in their previous home. The expensive but impersonal art pieces, the designer furnishings that seemed selected more for impression than comfort, the elaborate decorative objects that had required constant maintenance. In their place were things that mattered: family photographs in simple frames, children's artwork proudly displayed, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than appearance. The house felt lived in, genuine, a home rather than a showcase. That evening, as we gathered around a folding table for a simple dinner of takeout Chinese food, Rebecca raised her water glass in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, looking around at her family. And to the people who help us find our way to them, even when the path is difficult. Her gaze met mine across the table, and I saw in it something I'd never expected to find in Rebecca. Henderson Collins, genuine gratitude, respect, and the beginnings of friendship. I raised my glass in response, thinking of the strange, transformative journey that had begun with a cold night in a garage and led to this moment of authentic connection. To new beginnings, I echoed, and to the courage to embrace them. As conversation flowed around the table, William discussing Parker's new school, Margaret and Rebecca planning a community garden project, Tyler and Daniel debating the merits of various power tools, I felt a sense of belonging I had never experienced with the Henderson family before. The garage incident, painful as it had been in the moment, had become a turning point, the catalyst for honesty, for growth, for the dismantling of facades that had separated us far more effectively than physical walls ever could. What had begun as exclusion had ultimately led to inclusion of the most meaningful kind. Sometimes I reflected, watching Daniel laugh with his sister, the most valuable gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. And sometimes, being sent to sleep in a garage turns out to be the beginning rather than the end of a story, a Story about family, truth, and the courage to begin again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.